The incessant drumming of rain on the corrugated tin roof was the only constant in my world. For 3 weeks now, the monsoon had held this high plateau in its suffocating grip, transforming the world outside, my cramped, creaking quarters, into a perpetually shifting canvas of gray and white. Radio silence had settled in a week ago, a thick, impenetrable blanket that mirrored the fog outside. It suited me, frankly. I'd volunteered for this remote weather station precisely for this kind of isolation, a chance to truly immerse myself in the subtle dance of rare atmospheric phenomena, free from the distractions of the world below. My name is Arthur Finch, and my life revolves around data, logic, and the quiet satisfaction of patterns revealed. This station, a weathered old structure that seemed to sigh with every gust of wind, was supposed to be my sanctuary. I had my instruments, my meticulous charts, and the vast, indifferent sky. Nothing else mattered. It was on the 18th day of the deluge, when the wind howled with a particularly mournful timbre, that I finally decided to organize the station's archives. Tucked away in a dusty corner of the main observation room was a small, locked cabinet. Inside, stacked neatly, were the logbooks of my predecessors. Thick, leather-bound volumes, their pages yellowed with age, each one a chronicle of observations from this lonely outpost. I figured it might offer some historical context to the unique weather patterns of the plateau. The first few were mundane enough: barometric pressures, wind speeds, cloud formations, the dry bones of meteorological research. Then I found a logbook, bound in faded green, with entries dating back almost 70 years. The handwriting was neat at first, a legible script belonging to a man named Thomas Abernathy. His early entries were just like the others. But then, about halfway through, a subtle shift began. The handwriting grew a little looser, the observations less purely scientific. October 12, 1953. The wind carries strange whispers tonight, a chorus of empty voices that aren't the wind at all. I frowned, dismissing it as poetic license, perhaps a touch of loneliness affecting his prose. The next few entries reverted to normal, but the strange ones began to pepper the pages with increasing frequency. November 3, 1953. Shadows. Not of clouds, not of the old pines, but things that pass through the walls, unhindered by solid matter. They leave a chill in their wake. My brow furrowed. Abernathy was clearly a man of science, judging by his earlier meticulousness. What could have prompted such fantastical observations? I flipped more pages, the rain outside now sounding less like a natural phenomenon and more like a restless, probing presence. December 1st, 1953. The stars cried tonight, or perhaps it was only I. They shrieked with a sound that tore at the very fabric of my mind, a color I cannot name, a sorrow too vast for comprehension. This was beyond poetic. This was disturbed. I felt a prickle of unease crawl up my spine, a sensation I rarely entertained. I relied on facts, not spectral visions. I kept reading, my fingers tracing the increasingly erratic script. The entries became fragmented, desperate. January 10th, 1954. It distorts. The air itself is a lie. Do not trust your eyes, your ears, your very thoughts. It wears the world like a mask. February 2nd, 1954. They want in. They are always here. The data is wrong. Everything is wrong. Do not look up. Do not speak its name. The last entry, scrawled in what looked like a trembling hand, was chillingly simple, yet utterly nonsensical. March 1st, 1954. The light. It takes the edges. Gone. The logbook ended there. There were no further entries from Abernathy. I closed the book slowly, a profound sense of disquiet settling over me. Had the isolation driven him mad? This was a common hazard in remote posts. Hallucinations, paranoia, a descent into delusion. It was a logical explanation. I tried to shake it off, to return to my instruments, but the words lingered, echoing in the steady drone of the rain. That night, I was woken by a faint scratching sound from the hallway. I bolted upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was alone in the station. I lived alone here. I listened, straining. The scratching continued, a light, insistent rhythm, like fingernails dragging across wood. I reached for the lantern, my hand trembling slightly. I swung my legs out of bed, the cold floor biting at my bare feet. I crept to the door, my breath catching in my throat. I flung it open. Nothing. The hallway was empty, shrouded in the oppressive darkness that only the deepest night on a high plateau could offer. My mind raced, searching for a rational explanation. The old building settling? A rodent? But the sound had been too distinct, too deliberate. I shivered, not from the cold. The next morning, the strangeness escalated. I placed my favorite mug, the one with the chipped rim, on my desk before going to check the anemometer. When I returned, it was gone, vanished. I searched everywhere, growing increasingly frustrated. It was just a mug, but its disappearance felt personal. Later that day, I found it on the small, high shelf above the stove, a shelf I could only reach with a step stool. I hadn't touched it since making my morning tea. How could it have moved? I dismissed it as an absent-minded moment, a momentary lapse in my otherwise infallible memory. But the doubt lingered, a tiny, insidious seed. The weather data, my anchor to reality, began to twist into impossible shapes. The barometric pressure readings fluctuated wildly, dropping to levels that should have implied an immense, destructive storm, then normalizing just as quickly. But the storm outside remained a steady, unrelenting monsoon. The wind speeds would spike to hurricane force for minutes at a time, then calm to a gentle breeze, all while the physical world outside the windows showed no such drastic changes. It was as if my instruments were registering a storm that existed only on paper, a phantom tempest raging within the very air of the station. I spent hours poring over the numbers, convinced there was a fault in my equipment, a glitch in the sensors. I recalibrated everything, checked every connection, but the anomalies persisted, defying every law of physics I knew. It was like watching a perfectly good bridge suddenly start to ripple and flex like water. The data was wrong. Everything was wrong. The footsteps started a few days later, faint at first, a soft shuffling in the common room when I was in my quarters. Then distinct, heavy thuds directly above me when I was downstairs, and vice versa. I would call out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" My voice would echo in the empty building, swallowed by the ceaseless rain. I started to check the doors and windows obsessively, ensuring they were still locked, still secure. They always were. The logbooks, especially Abernathy's, began to haunt my waking thoughts. It distorts. The air itself is a lie. Was that what was happening? Was something here, on this desolate plateau, warping the very fabric of reality? Was it a side effect of the atmospheric phenomena I was studying? Some unknown energy field that affected perception? Or was it something else? Something sentient? One evening, as I was charting the latest impossible wind readings, I heard it again. The scratching from the hallway, more insistent this time. And beneath it, a low, guttural murmur, like a voice speaking from deep underwater. It wasn't a language I recognized, just a slow, wet rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards. I froze, my hand hovering over my pen. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence. My skin prickled with a cold dread that went deeper than any fear of the natural world. I didn't move for what felt like an eternity. The scratching stopped, the murmuring faded, leaving only the relentless rain and the deafening beat of my own heart. I stayed up all night, a cold dread clinging to me.
Sleep felt like a dangerous indulgence, an open door to whatever was waiting.
The lines between reality and delusion were blurring with terrifying speed. Was it the isolation? My mind, a fortress built on logic and empirical evidence, was under siege. Every creak of the old building, every unexpected shadow, every whisper of the wind was now suspect. I found myself talking to myself, arguing with the invisible, demanding answers from the empty rooms. My meticulous charts became less about scientific observation and more about documenting the creeping madness, trying to find a pattern in the impossible. I started leaving small, inconsequential objects in specific, memorable places: a pen on the edge of the desk, a specific book open on a particular page. Almost every time, they would be moved, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically. My pen would be found in the sugar bowl. The book would be face down on the floor, open to a completely different chapter. It was a game, I realized, with a sickening lurch, a deliberate taunt. And the stars, Abernathy's entry, the stars cried tonight. I found myself staring out of the small, grimy window into the perpetual gray, half expecting the clouds to part and reveal a sky full of weeping celestial bodies. The thought itself was an aberration, a sign of how far I was slipping. I no longer cared about atmospheric phenomena. My new study was the station itself, the insidious, unseen force that was slowly, meticulously unraveling my sanity. Was it the Plateau? Was it something inherent in the very structure of this ancient building? Or was it something that had chosen me? The rain continued, a constant, mocking rhythm. Radio silence remained. I was truly, utterly alone, trapped with whatever was here. I picked up Abernathy's logbook again, my fingers tracing the last desperate words. The light, it takes the edges. Gone. The corners of my vision seemed to soften, the outlines of the room less defined. The hum of the rain seemed to deepen, to take on a strange resonance. I felt the edges of my own reality begin to fray, just as Abernathy described. I closed my eyes, but the feeling persisted. When I opened them again, the room seemed subtly different. The old, worn wooden walls felt thinner, like a curtain or a veil, and beyond them I could almost perceive a vast, shifting darkness, something that stretched beyond comprehension. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the isolation wasn't the cause of the madness. It was merely the catalyst. It simply cleared the stage for whatever had always been here, waiting, in the heart of this high, lonely place. And it was my turn to dance.